Hi guys, it's Kelly here and I'm back with another video for honeybee stamps. Today I am going to be using two sets, the Paradise Plumeria, which is one of my illustrations, showed you the stencils, didn't end up using them. And then I also used Dawn, my best friend Dawn Woolslagel's design from this release as well, which is called Beach Please. So in one of my last videos, I told you guys how I had this idea for like a forced scale scene that I wanted it to be the Plumerias up front and then this scene behind it. And what ended up happening was I used the Palm Beach cover plate and then I didn't want to cover it up. So I was like, okay, how can I do this? Because the Plumerias are drawn a bit larger, obviously, so they're a little easier to color, but also so that they fit nicely on an A2 size card. Here, what I'm doing is I decided I was going to use the little beach cabin, and then I'm marking where I need my horizon lines to go. Here, I'm just lightly erasing them. I can still see just a hint of a line, but nothing that's going to ruin my design. And then I am going to start doing some masking for the background. If you do not have the dies for the Beach Please set, you would want to stamp that first and then mask it. But because I do, I'm going to stamp it, die cut it, and then blend it into my scene. I'm also going to use some scrap pieces of Eclipse masking tape just to block off the area to the right-hand side to make sure that I don't get any ink on there. And this part in the middle is actually going to be our water. So I'm going to use the same colors. This has kind of been like my go-to for this summer, I guess, which is Salvage Patina, Salty Ocean, Mermaid Lagoon, and Uncharted Mariner. I'm going to use all four of them for the water. I'm only going to use three of them. I'm going to leave off the Uncharted Mariner for the sky. But anywho, so the whole idea for this was that I still had this vision of like peeking through these plumerias to this little like beach oasis in the background. But because they are drawn bigger, it is challenging to do that without covering up what's behind it. And because I am a scene girl, I'm a scene girly, I love the scene cards, I didn't want to cover up the scene behind it. So as I typically do some of my best work one night while I was laying there trying to fall asleep, it occurred to me that a way that I could do this would be to layer some acetate and to have a clear front on my card, which would allow me to then move the plumerias out of the way to see the full scene behind it. So that is what we are doing today. So once I have my water done, I'm going to go ahead and remove my masking tape. If you ever have any trouble with your tape, like because I use a low-tack tape, this is the Pixie tape, but if you ever have any trouble with any tape and you feel like it is like really, really stuck and you're worried it's going to tear your paper, try pulling it off at a diagonal. That usually will help it to not tear than to just go straight across. So for our sky, I'm doing, like I said, the same thing. I'm leaving a little bit of a lighter halo on the horizon, but the sky is going to be a much lighter application than the water is anyway. And I think I mentioned this in another video, like the water appears blue because it's a reflection of the sky. The water is actually clear. So when I'm doing my scene cards, I try to match my water and my sky closely. So now that those are both done and out of the way, then the last thing to do is the actual sand. And I think it would be really cute to do it like with the surf kind of coming towards the little cabin. But for what I had in mind, since I wanted the plumerias to be up front and then the cabin behind it, I decided to do a beach scene that was more of like along the horizon, that the water would be behind it. So now all I've done here is just flipped it upside down so I can get my tape in place. If your tape is not placed perfectly, don't worry, you can fix it with markers. That's what I typically end up doing because it's hard to line it up 100%. So for the sand, I am using brushed corduroy, and I am keeping it a little bit darker towards the horizon line and lighter towards the forefront of like where we're viewing it from. But then I'm also going to use this, what is this, ground espresso? And I'm using a smaller brush. And the reason I'm using a smaller brush is because I like the texture that the smaller brush gives me. This is normally what we try to avoid in ink blending. And you can see here, if you start on the tape and then blend down, you can avoid those marks. But I wanted my sand to have some texture. Intentionally later on, I'm going to put more in with my alcohol markers. But I got a good start here with my brush. If you like it really smooth, that's okay. Just start off the paper on that piece of tape and you can still get a really smooth blend. Once I am done with the ground espresso, I'm going to go back in with the brush corduroy and just blend that out. And then that is going to be the background scene. Now, you could use this scene for a whole lot of things for a summer card because it's nice and simple. And then your added elements is what's going to make it more interesting. So here I'm just double checking with my stamp that everything's going to fit on there really nicely, and then I'll move on to stamping. So because I wasn't sure how the Plumerias were going to lay out, I did end up stamping all of them. Ultimately, I ended up using the branch and then the larger cluster. But I wanted to make sure that I was going to have enough and I wasn't going to have to stamp some more and go back and do it again. So for the stamping, I'm using the Intense Black ink from Honeybee. I ended up stamping it twice because I didn't get really good coverage on my flowers the first time around. But honestly, like that is the joy of the Misty of a stamp positioner, is that I can stamp it multiple times. So here you can see like the branch one barely stamped at all. So I'm just going to re-ink them, make sure I'm much more thorough this time, and stamp them again. So why did I choose the cabin? I think that the little beach chairs with the little lights are adorable and I love that. But the cabin had much more to color, and that is why I chose that one, because honestly, like you guys are probably, fangirls or fan guides of Dawn because she's super talented, but so am I. Like that doesn't change just because I'm friends with her. And in fact, I was using her stamps long before I knew her. So I'm super excited to be able to use and color her illustrations again. Because we'll do a little bit of story time. So my first design team that I was ever on was for a blog named Hero, and that was the first one, not the first one I applied to, but the first one I was accepted to. And they did a collaboration, which I love. I love companies that support each other, but they did a collaboration with, at the time, Dawn's company, W+9. And so that was the first time that I ever saw her stamps. And I was like, look at all these flowers. Like we as team, we got to pick, I think like one set or something like that. Well, let me tell you, I picked more than one set and I just went ahead and purchased it. Just add to cart and come on home with me. And then probably like a year after that, she and I were both invited to a craft retreat. And her first time at the retreat was my first time at the retreat. And I'm sure you've heard me say this about 1,000 times about her before, but like some people are just like soul sisters. Like that minute that you meet, it feels like you have known each other forever and you just know like you're it. You're it together forever. So that's kind of how it was for us. And that was over a decade ago. But shortly after meeting her at the retreat, she actually invited me to join her design team, which is honestly a funny story in and of itself because I did not understand what was happening. I didn't understand what was happening. So we were hanging out at this retreat that we attended, and Kim Hughes, who owned Paper Smooches at the time, they've closed. She's now Kim Mraz. We were all, me, her, and Dawn were just sitting there talking, and Dawn was like, so are you interested in joining the design team? And I was like, girl, I have so much stuff on my plate. Like, I don't even know if I could pick up another design team right now. Like I'm not going to be searching out any design teams. And she was like, oh, okay. And Kim's looking at me and I'm looking at Kim and then I'm looking at Dawn and I was like, what have I just missed here? And so she repeats herself and she was like, are you interested in joining the design team? And I'm like, girl, I just said that there's a lot going on. I mean, I would, if it was like a super special design team, like maybe I would, consider it, but I'm not searching out any design teams. Like what? I don't understand what you're asking me. And because my brain could not comprehend that she would be inviting me onto her design team, I literally just assumed she was talking about like just general, like if I was looking for any more design teams. So finally, the two of them were like, Kelly, are you interested in joining the W+9 design team? And I was like, oh my gosh, yes, of course I'm interested. So yeah, it just took me a hot minute to get it. But so I got to work with all of her, designs all the time. And so I was spoiled. And then there wasn't, too many coming out. So I am just as happy as you guys that she is now illustrating again and working with other companies, because it means that I get to color all her stuff and put her beautiful things on my cards, and it makes me happy. So anywho, I could not wait to do this, and the cabin just has more to color than the other one, and so that's how I picked it. That's long story long is basically what I just did there. So I wanted some blue-green palms. That's why I chose the colors that I did. And then I really liked the hot pink. I thought that they would go really nicely with I would plan on doing my Plumerias in orange, and I thought that they would work really well together. And then I went kind of back and forth about whether or not to do the wood like a whitewashed look. And I decided that I wanted it to blend a bit more with the sand. So I opted to go for like a more traditional brown. I don't think that you see that, honestly, I don't think you see this very often in actual like coastal places, probably because that stain would fade so fast in the sun. But nonetheless, that is what I went with. Now you may notice that some of the colors are a little bit different in the finished card. And that is because, sometimes you go with a general color selection that you think will look good together, and then at the end you're like, ooh, maybe not. So for me, what happened was my colors looked guys. That's what I just said. Looked. Stop it. Let's all take a moment of silence for my language skills. Can we? They looked disconnected. That is why I had to change some of the colors, and I will show you how I did that without having to recolor the entire image, because mama ain't got time for that. So here I am going in, doing those browns. I'm leaving a little bit of a highlight on the tops of the stairs, on the side of the deck, more of like the central, for like the roof, for the window, for the door, more of a central highlight. I did want to incorporate some of that orange into the scene. Here is part of where I made my error. I probably should have done the orange with the top part of the cottage and the door so that it would be visible. But what I ended up doing was doing the surfboard and this little towel. And those two items are covered up by the flowers when the card is closed. So you can't really tell that I tried to tie them together. So here is the yellow. I'm going to add a little bit of yellow to the surfboard. I'm also going to do the little beach bag that's sitting on the deck. So cute. And then I think those are the only two things that I did yellow. You will see more yellow in the flowers to kind of tie those in and bring them together. One thing to note for the ground, I am going to color in the rocks, but I am not going to color in the ground portion until I get it glued into my scene so that I can blend them in pretty seamlessly. So the same colors I used in the house, I used in the palm trees. And then for the rocks, I just went with the same grays that I used to color the chair, the sign, and the, what is that called? Wanted to call it a life raft, but I don't think that that's what it's actually called. It will come to me, maybe. We'll see. So now moving on to the flowers, you guys have probably seen me color these before. So I'm going to just give you a quick rundown on this one branch instead of having you watch me color all of them. Basic rules apply. Plumerias are designed that they're almost kind of like a pinwheel effect. So that edge that comes up, you want that to be lighter. So we're going to put our darkest color right up against that edge to help that highlight kind of pop forward. So because I chose to do the oranges, I did want them to be a little bit more on the yellow side. So I chose for my lightest color to be a Y08, and I set my oranges up in a way that would get me there. So once I have the basis down for my shadows, you pretty much just go in with your next, your what I call my dark midtone, and then go over what you've already put down with the YR09 and then extend it out slightly. And then that's what we're going to do with each consecutive color until we get to the light mid-tone. We should have just a sliver of white left, and that is going to be for the highlight. Now, that will not be true for all of the petals because some of them, like these ones, are tucked under, or some of them are curled up. And if it's curled up or it's tucked under something, it's going to be a little bit darker than, say, that large one that's completely open in full bloom, because that one will be getting more light. So you can see here the edge, which is my highlight, has white left, and then the very edge of the petal has a little bit of white left. Now I'm going to bring in the yellow a little bit further to kind of blend into that orange, and it's really just going to brighten everything up a little bit. So I'm not worried about that. Here is something I do want to mention, and this is my own faux pas, if you will. I needed to re-ink my Y08. That's where I just went. It desperately needed to be re-inked because I noticed that my colors were kind of smearing a little bit. And if you ever notice that happening with ink that you know usually does not bleed or smear on you, which I have used Honeybee for years, I know it traditionally does not smear for me unless I've gone in there straight away and it's still wet. I noticed it, and usually it's because your marker is dry, and so you're putting down more pressure, almost like scrubbing your lines to get solid color. And if you're doing that, then you do run the risk of smearing that black ink. So I had to stop and re-ink it. If you don't have a re-inker on hand, just try to find a similar color. Most of the time when we're doing all these color blends, you can find a similar color and it won't make that much of a difference. For the leaves, I am just following the lines that are there with my darkest color, also adding my darkest color down the center in the middle, and then just kind of blending those out. I will leave a lighter area in between all of the sections. For the most part, this will get filled in quite a bit with the YG03, but I will leave some lighter portions on the edges for my YG01. And that's just really going to help them look like they have that little bit of highlight, and that the middle section, because it is much darker, is kind of bowed in. So just a little way to, help get them some more dimension. So here, as I did my coloring and I finished coloring all of them in orange, I noticed that we had this disconnect and I didn't love it. So the first way I'm going to try to fix that disconnect is by putting some pink into my Plumerias. I know it's not going to be a true pink because I already have down a ton of orange, but at first I tried the RV02, that was not saturated enough. So then I went in with the RV04, and this was. It is hard to see on camera, but in real life, the centers do look much more on the pinker side versus the orange. So I just blended that out with the RV02, and otherwise I left them just the same. I just added that little bit of pink in. for the trees. I have a yellow green in my plumerias and I have a blue green in my palms, and I want to get them a little bit closer to each other. So I tried a G07 and it wasn't enough. Then I went in with a YG03 and it still wasn't enough. So then I'm going to go in with the Y08. So adding in the yellow, that's the color that I'm missing, adding in the yellow directly over those greens is going to really bring it around to that yellow green and help everything kind of connect. They are still darker, but at least they're now in the same kind of shade. So from here, I'm going to get my coordinating dies. I will use my pixie tape to tape them in place, and then we'll be able to move on to the next part of building the card. I know you're like, Kelly, it was a clear front card and we're 20 some minutes in. Yes, I know, but I had to color all of the things in order to be able to build the card. So here I'm just laying my cabin in place while I figure out the placement for my flowers and how many I'm going to add, if I'm going to leave any gaps, anything like that. And so I decided I liked it best with a little gap in the middle, so that you would be able to kind of see the walk up. And so now I'm going to glue down my little cabin, and then I will blend this into its background scene first, and then we'll work on the flowers. So I just want to say, if you're like, I don't love a clear front card, or I don't love flowers, you could make this card and leave off the clear front and the plumerias, and it would still be a really great beach card with just the cabin, because I mean, this stamp, let's be honest, is fantastic. So here what I'm doing is everything's glued down, and now I'm going in with my Copic markers and I'm color matching my background. So this is something that you have to do yourself, because I can't tell you what colors your ink blending are going to be. I can tell you that most of the time when I am doing these distress inks, the combination that I use, a BO0, a BO2, a BO4, a BO6 are ones that match pretty closely. But how heavy-handed you are, like maybe you won't need any B00 and you will need the BO4. So just keep those things in mind. When I was doing the water, I noticed that the blue was too blue and it needed to be a bit more blue-green, so I went in with a BG23. Don't be afraid of mixing your colors so that you can get a color that actually matches your background. And you can see as we're going through, you know, things are kind of disappearing into the background, and that is exactly what we want. For the ground and the sand area, I went in with my lightest color first, and you can see this doesn't blend perfectly. We are going to get a better blend here in a minute, but I like having the lighter color down for saturation, especially when I'm going to be doing lots of blending, which I am here. So this, I did a little shadow underneath the stones, a little shadow underneath the house. I did a little bit of a darker walkway, like where you would be walking up. But another way that you can very easily help your die cuts blend into your scene is by adding texture. So I am going to smoothly add all of my color. You can see this is how I would normally add it. Very smooth to get them to blend together. And it does work pretty well. I don't think I would have an issue leaving it like this, but a way to get it to blend even more, and especially with the drawing of the illustration, this is a much sketchier kind of style drawing, which I am here for. It's not my style. I like clean lines when I'm drawing, but I love her style of drawing. But anyway, there's lots of little like rocks and grasses and stuff underneath the house. And so I'm just going to mimic that with some dots and dashes myself. Just a little bit of kind of like stippling or texture lines. And I'm going to put the darkest ones closest to the house and then bring them out just a little bit. And then again with the mid-tone. So you're going to see this sand area becomes pretty textured. It's not going to be a smooth look. You can leave off these dots if you would prefer a smooth look. I think it looks more interesting. And maybe like they have some kids that kind of run around the house and play in the sand, and, you know, there's people out there, you know, doing things. One of the things that I did not love was that my house was almost the same color as my water. And so they were blending in together. So here again, we're going to go in and we're going to fix that. I went in first with a YG03 to make it more of a blue-green. And I liked that, but it wasn't enough. So then I went in with that BG23 and did that, and that was great. It was a nice complementary green to the pink, and it helped it stand out from the water. For the clear front cover, I cut my piece of acetate in half, because it's an 8.5 by 11. So I cut it to 5.5 by 8.5. Then I scored it at 4.25 and then cut it at 5.5. So it's a perfect rectangle. It's a perfect square. It's 5.5 by 5.5, but it's scored on one side at 4.25. And that's going to give me this little clear kind of flap that's going to fold over the back and attach to create my clear card front. So with acetate, I find it often works better if you use a dry adhesive. So I am using some just rip and tear tape to hold this in place. I will snug it up into the fold and make sure everything's lined up before I fold that over and press it down. Now here is my clear front. It is firmly attached. And now I can adhere my flowers to the clear front. Now, with that said, I told you I find I have better luck with dry adhesive. That is true, but that doesn't mean that liquid adhesive won't work. But I don't want to rely on liquid adhesive to hold my card together. That is why I chose to use the tape, because it's like the structural part of my card. For the flowers, to glue them onto the acetate, I think the liquid adhesive is fine to hold it. So I've put those down. You can see that little walkway peeking through. I'm happy with the way that it's looking, but now I need to trim off the excess. So that's me looking for my scissors. Don't you tell me you're a crafter and you haven't lost something in plain sight, because I know that you have. We all have. It was just right there, and then it will disappear, and it's still there, but it's like your brain can't see it. But anywho, so I'm just going to trim off this excess. Now, you guys know, if you haven't learned from this card in and of itself, and you've seen my other videos, then you definitely know I don't love a white outline. I want my scenes to look cohesive. And so that means I am going to do the same thing that we just did for the little summer cabin to these flowers. I am going to go in with my markers and color in my outline so that it blends my entire scene in. Here is something that I will tell you to be cautious of. Like, you have to kind of hold it down a little bit. Like, you can see me holding it down with my hand so it's not kind of flying all over the place, because the top, the acetate does kind of float over the top. It is folded, but it's not, I don't know, maybe it doesn't have enough weight. I'm not sure, but it doesn't lay flat. It could just be because of the material. But anywho, I have sped this up because I wanted you to be able to see it come together, but I don't think that you need to see, like, in real time, because it is kind of a process. And hopefully as we go through this, you'll see those areas start to disappear into each other. Does this mean your flowers look crazy when they're not on the scene? Yes, it does. Your flowers do look a little bit wild because they have this colored outline that doesn't appear to make any sense. But nobody should be seeing that, because when they're opening the card, the flowers will be up top and you won't be able to see them. You'll just be able to see the beautiful scene in the background. And then when it's closed, it makes sense again. So I wasn't too worried about it, and I wanted my scene to look cohesive when the card was closed, since it is a clear front card. The beach underneath, would be where I would maybe just write like a little miss you or wish you were here and sign my name, because you wouldn't be able to see that because of the flowers. Alternatively, if you wanted to have an opportunity to write a little bit of a smaller note, you could actually turn it into a trifold card and adhere the scene onto another card base. So you would be able to flip the plumerias to see the beach scene, and then you would flip the beach scene to see the note inside. Somebody asked me about this recently, and I think I addressed it, that I used to outline all my stamps, but then I stopped. Well, it's part of it is because the inks got better. Like, they got darker and more of a true black. But here, because the plumerias are right up front and I want them to be a bright focal point, I chose to go in and outline them because it makes them stand out more. It's a bolder black. For those of you wondering, is it easier to outline your own stamps than other people's stamps? The answer is no. It's about the same. Even though I drew it, it's about the same. So here, if that bothers you, if that piece inside bothers you, that you can see the coloring, you can cut to, I just used plain white. You could use whatever colors you wanted, to just stick on the back of the acetate so you can't see that Copic marker coming through. But just make sure that you, once you adhere it down, you check the front to make sure you can't see any of that white before your ink dries. Now here, for the sentiment, I could have stamped this in the sky, you know, and had a flat area to stamp on. But I actually liked it a little bit closer to the house. So I chose to stamp on the acetate, and for that I'm using StazOn Jet Black. This is a solvent-based ink. You guys are going to think I'm crazy, but I'm a baker, and I love the smell of a solvent-based ink because it reminds me of almond extract. Anybody else? Anybody? It smells so good. I love the way that they smell. But anyway, you have to use a like a StazOn or a solvent-based ink to stamp on acetate because other inks won't dry. So this one, I pulled out a different set to use originally. And then I ended up using a sentiment from Dawn's set from Beach Please. So now I'm just going to add some shimmers to my flowers, also to the water and to the sand, you know, because you have that light that reflects off the sand as well. So I'm adding some clear shimmer to that, to the water, and then I'm going to go in with a white gel pen and add in some different highlights. So I'm adding highlights to the rocks, to the chair. I'm going to do dots on the sand, just kind of like mimicking those same dots that we did with the darker colors. And then also, I drew in this little area for the window, like how, you know, it shows like the reflection of the window. Instead of leaving that black, I went over it with white. And then I just did a couple of quick little lines in the water that would maybe look like some far off surf, just to add some interest there. For the plumerias, the only white that I added was a little bit in the center, and then kind of from the center out, I did just a couple of little dots. I don't necessarily know that this is accurate for plumerias, but it did add some interest to the front of the card. And then that's it. So I hope that this helps you guys take your scene cards another, you know, step further, get you in the mood for summer. Hot weather is here. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I always appreciate your time, and I will catch you on the next video. Bye.